G'day folks, MBS here. Today I'd like to talk about gauges, the old style gauges in the old cars going up to about the year 2000. I'm not familiar with many modern gauges these days. I've seen a few in cars, but they don't seem to be much different to the old school. Let's start off with the early days, where all we had was a light. Now I'll show these up in a proper picture on your screen. Look, this is nothing more than a light comes on when the engine overheats. Okay, now we're going to be talking just about temperature gauges for the time being. There's oil pressure, there's vacuum voltmeters, all sorts of other gauges you can get. But in a standard motor vehicle, old school, this is what you got in the early days, just a light. A light would come on, tell you your engine's overheating, or a light would come on, tell you your oil pressure's, you got none. Alright, that wasn't very good, was it? A little bit late warning most of the time. Forgive me for all the noise, we're out in my front yard here at the moment. Cars around, birds, dogs, all sorts of critters. I didn't know it was that noisy this hour of the morning. So we've got just a normal light. Then we went up to more fancy ones. I don't know if you could see that, but I'll show it once again. I'll show that up. That's actually a gauge where a little needle moves across a scale. And in this particular one, it's got blue, a white section, and a red section. And it's also got a petrol gauge and oil pressure gauge all in the same unit. They were pretty good. That was better than just having a light come on. At least you had some idea where your temperature was sitting. But when does it overheat? When it gets into the red line, or is it overheating in the later part of this white section? Who knows? Not that great, but better than having a light. Yeah, I think you'll all agree with that. That's standard gauges. Then we move on to aftermarket gauges that you can buy. Like if you'd never liked those gauges and you wanted something better, most people went for the old Smith's gauge. Remember the old Smith's gauge and VDOs from years gone by? They actually had a scale of maybe 0 to 240 degrees. So you could actually see the temperature. You know exactly what it is. Now in old cars we had 80-degree thermostats, somewhere around that. And you could see if it was on 80 degrees C or not, and give or take a few degrees, your thermostat's working fine. Then they came up with these, what do you call them, stepper motor gauges. Now you can't even see the gauges, and this has got a smoked screen, and that's the only thing I didn't like about it. I've got two of them in my car, two sitting there, oil pressure, temperature gauge. You can barely see them because in a ute with the glass right behind me, I get a lot of reflection, can't see it properly. But when it lights up at night, easy to see. But it tells me, I know for a fact now that my thermostat's playing up because I'm running on 70 degrees instead of 80. So I can't tell that on my gauge if I'm looking at the gauge on the dash. I couldn't tell the thermostat's not operating properly. But when you've got a great gauge, you can tell a lot. Now the great thing about these gauges, unlike the old gauges, this actually warns you when you're overheating. You set whatever you want it to alarm at. I've got mine set at 95 degrees, and when the water temperature gets to 95, the whole gauge just starts flashing. Yeah, not a little light that comes on that you might miss. And if you miss the gauge flashing, then it also buzzes, so it sits there going buzz, buzz, buzz in time with the flashing. So it is fantastic, and it has saved me once. I was sitting at traffic lights and started to overheat, and when I got to 95, the gauge started flashing, started buzzing. I picked it up immediately, obviously. And what I did then, I just revved the engine up for a bit, and the temperature did come down. So I knew, geez, I've got hardly any water in this thing. I'm only 2 kilometres away from home, so as soon as I started driving it, temperature came down, the buzzer went off. And yeah, I had a leak in the heater hose, so thankfully I picked that up. Now if I didn't have a warning system like the old gauges, just a light, or even the other gauge it would have went over into the red line, I might not have picked that up, and I wouldn't have had a clue. So yeah, I could have destroyed the motor, blown a head gasket, something like that. And lots of people get caught out on it, because you can't watch your gauges all the time, can you? If you haven't got a warning device in the gauge, then what's the point of it? You're forever watching your gauges. Am I overheating? You know, have I got enough oil pressure? You're always panicking that everything's going all right. You've got no warning signals at all in the old cars, just the gauge. So if you're not watching them all the time, you could get into a bit of strife. And we want to be driving safely on the road, not watching our gauges all the time. And that's where this stepper motor one was pretty good. I didn't have to ever watch it. I occasionally look down, yeah. And you probably do too. You got to look at your gauges, make sure everything's going right. But in the older cars, there was no warning. And now if you actually ran out of water, let's say your car leaked water overnight and you hopped in and started it, you wouldn't even know. Your gauge, even this gauge, wouldn't tell me, because water temperature is measured by the fluid. If there's no fluid in your engine, the water temperature gauge doesn't work. Yeah, simple as that. And it won't measure air temperature or steam. And you could cook your motor and not even know it, and the gauge could still be reading normal temperature or a little bit below normal temperature. And you get caught out. Alright. Now there's a new gauge out in the market. I don't know if it'll take off or not, but it doesn't measure water temperature, it measures metal temperature. So you screw it onto the head and it measures your cylinder head temperature. And it also has an alarm system, so whether that system will take off or not, yet to be seen. I'll be doing a review on one fairly soon for my diesel coaster bus. I'll be fitting it into that, and we'll be doing a review on it sometime down the track. But yeah, the gauges are absolutely vital. And I'm not talking the light. That's old school, real old school. Any sort of a gauge that tells you actual temperature is far better than a dial moving across a little scale. And yeah, okay. What can I say about that? You don't know what it is. Where is 180? I mean, when you buy the car brand new, you've probably got a good idea where the temperature gauge sits when you bought it, and you've always used that as a set. Okay, if it's sitting there, I'm okay. If it's a little below, something's wrong, a little bit high, I'm overheating from that set point. And that's how most people relate to their gauges. If you love your car, you'd want a good gauge, yeah? You don't want a light. And I would say you probably wouldn't trust the gauge that much. I would definitely upgrade to something that warns you. Set the temperature at 95 degrees, so it warns you early, before the boiling point of 100 degrees. Now, that's an interesting point as well, because water boils at 100 degrees atmospheric pressure, but you've got a radiator cap on your car that keeps the system under pressure. And your boiling point will raise to probably around about 125 degrees. But that's no good to you if the radiator cap fails. If you've set your warning to be at 105 degrees, because you think, oh, that'll be hot enough, the water's already boiled off if you've got no pressure. So you can get caught out. And just in my mind thinking now, well, Commodores, they run 95 degree thermostats, okay? So your gauge is useless. You need something to warn you before it boils, before the water evaporates, vaporizes, because then your gauge doesn't work. And I've seen countless of times and heard countless stories of people that have been watching their gauges and they've never even seen it go up to hot. Because once you run out of water, the gauge comes back down and it sits on normal temperature, if not a little bit below, and everyone thinks everything's going great. So, and they've got no warning that their engine's overheating and they've blown head gaskets, etc. So yeah, that's why I like these stepper motor ones in my car, because they do give you early warning, and I've set the temperature low enough to give me early warning, so even if I run out of water. But it won't save me if I leak the water out overnight, and there's no water in there to begin with when I start up the next day, so I could get caught out that way. But otherwise, apart from that, if you check your water regularly, you should be checking your water regularly, lifting your bonnet up every now and again, make sure there's water in the bottle. I even take the radiator cap off when the engine's dead cold and make sure it's full to the brim, because the two-way system on the cooling system, where it pushes the water out and sucks it back out of the bottle, may fail on the radiator cap, push the water out, but it won't suck it back in. Next thing you know, you've got this big air gap, and if you've got a leak, you'll always look at your bottle thinking everything's okay, when it's actually not. You're running out of water in your radiator, or even though your reservoir says full, and you get caught out there. But I'm going to do a detailed video on that later as well, cooling systems. But today I just wanted to go through gauges, just for the fun of it, different gauges that are available. There are even digital versions of this, where it's got a digital display inside the analog display. You've got the rectangle screens now where you can monitor RPM, oil, volts, temperature, all sorts of stuff. They're not very expensive either. But anything's got to be better than the original gauge, in my opinion, because they're just not adequate. If you love your pride and joy and you want to protect it, you should have something decent, yeah? Get yourself a decent gauge. Put it in a prominent place where it can be seen. I've seen them in a lot of funny places, out on the bonnet in some cars, you know, triple gauges sitting out there on the bonnet. Sitting up on the dash, I used to have gauges sitting up here or somewhere around about there. You can see there's holes in my dash where I had a triple cluster sitting there, then I moved them over there, and now I've got them sitting here. So I've moved them around a bit, and I've changed gauges quite a few times, just trying to find one that worked best for me. And these ones that I've got now, the stepper motor ones, I'm quite happy with them. So yeah, look, not much more I can say. Don't be a gauge watcher. Convert over to a gauge that actually warns you when something's gone wrong, so you can straight away do something about it instead of catching it where it's too late. And really, that's probably the whole gist of this story, is that I wanted to let you know that there were gauges that kept up with the modern cars gauges now that warn you. And I think if you've got an old car, you know, collector's item sort of thing, you should have at least a gauge in it that's going to be reliable, and it's going to tell you if something's going to go wrong before it goes wrong. Okay, so I'll catch you in another video.